least this is we are housing one quarter of the world population, and we have very rich linguistic diversity. But according to Linguistic People Survey by Ganesh Dubey, it identified 780 languages in India right now, which is 2010. Which compared with 1961 census, which recorded 1,652 languages. That means we lost about more than 800 languages, or about 800 languages. What happened to these languages? We really do not have, because after 1960, 61 census, from 1971 census onwards, they have actually stopped recording the languages that are minority or the tribal languages. I think they only started recording some of the dominant languages. That means we don't really know exactly what happened and how these languages disappeared. And now, even now, out of the 780 languages, 480 languages are spoken by tribals, and 80 are coastal languages. For example, as Praveen was mentioning, Northeast has many of these languages. Arunachal Pradesh has actually highest number of languages with as many as 63 languages spoken there. West Bengal has highest number of scripts, 9 of those, and about around 38 languages. We have these small languages all over the things. As we said, 90% of the world languages could be extinct by the end of this century. Compare this with the biological diversity. We hear a lot more about the loss of biological diversity, but if you compare, mammals are about 4,400 species, only 326 are endangered. That means only 7.4 of those are, the worst case is 7.4 are endangered. But we hear a lot about biological loss of biological diversity. The same thing about birds. 8,600 species and about only 231 endangered. Compare that with, we have 6,000 languages and about 5,000 languages or even 3,000 languages might be endangered or might disappear by the end of this year, which end of this century, sorry. So we are really, this is a big loss to the humankind, because language, as we know, encompasses. Actually, language represents a considerable testimony to the human intellectual achievement. This is what distinguishes humans from the rest of the species, mammal species or others, right? So this is arguably greater loss than the biological the loss of the biological diversity, because the structure of human language represents the greatest testament. This has the greatest wealth, and we are going to lose that by the end of this century. So this is a very, very serious problem. So we have endangered languages all throughout. I think there are South Dravidian languages, there are Central Dravidian languages, and North Dravidian languages, Munda languages, Andamanese and Nicobar languages. And we, especially for some of us who are working in the field of historical linguistics, to be able to we do not have data resources on many of these languages, like that can provide clues into our linguistic prehistory, like the Veda or Nahali language or Kusunda. These are considered as substrate languages that may have very ancient history. But and Burushaski, which is in the northern region, where it could provide some clues about the Indus languages or the substrate of those Indus languages. So the great Andamanese languages, actually many of them have died in the last 50 years. The Akajeru is the only one which has 7 speakers in 2006. I think we have this person, he was the last speaker who died in 2010 of Akabo language. So we have, some of them are saying we have come too late, and so there are several of these languages that are dying, and that if we really want to preserve the human knowledge, I think it is important that we use, right now we have the technology, as Praveen and others have presented. I think we have great resources right now. I think we should utilize and preserve some of this human knowledge. Well, I don't. That's where I want to conclude. So I think let's get into the discussion. Pravindas, back to you.
And Suresh, it was pretty interesting to learn about few of the languages. Thank you for listing them too. Moving to Kalika Bali, could you please tell me, what do you think technology, the role of technology in preserving languages from your perspective?
Yeah, before the role of technology, can I just say that, Suresh has done has presented a pretty comprehensive view of the problem at hand. And can I just say that languages don't die overnight, right? And there are reasons why languages die. And these reasons have nothing to do with technology. And they have to do everything to do with the social, the political, and the economic situation of the communities, right? So if we don't acknowledge that and we don't address that, we can throw as much technology as we want on the languages in the community. We're not going to change anything much, right? So when we are talking about Suresh showed the Andamanese language situation, and the last Bo speaker died very recently. A lot of the languages which we think right now are pretty robust might be in that situation if we don't acknowledge that they need adequate support, infrastructure in all these different axes. Now, as far as technology is concerned, technology can only be an aid to human ingenuity and can only amplify human efforts. Technology on its own is not a solution for everything. And while I'm very, very cognizant of how technology can help in many ways, and the role organizations like Wikimedia play in preserving and encouraging people to preserve their own culture, it is ultimately the people, who have to get on board. And I find that the question then is, what are we doing to encourage people to do that, and can technology play a role in that? So I'll give a very simple example. There's because Arunachal was mentioned, so we've been working with some of our collaborators who have been looking into this very tiny language community called Idumishmi in Arunachal Pradesh, right? It's a very tiny, 15,000 speakers, 20,000 speakers, that range. Most of them, unlike some of the languages that we've worked in the past with, say, for example, the Gondi people, they're not really impoverished, in purely economic sense. But the children have kind of, the younger generation has kind of moved to, Hindi. Effectively, right? And the older generation, a lot of these tribal languages in Arunachal have these councils, culture councils, as part of the community. Now, the culture council is very concerned that the younger generation, they have the smartphones, they have the technology, they are very conversant with the technology, are moving away from the language. And as you move away from language, you do move away from the culture. Our identities, our cultural bearings are so firmly rooted in our linguistic identities, right? So then what can technology do to support the council, or do things that incentivizes in some sense, the younger generation? One of the things is maybe make educational materials, storybooks, etc. available. Now, how do you make that available? You and I don't know Idumishimi. We can't sit and write stories in Idumishimi, right? So how can we then facilitate the actual Idumishimi language community to create these stories, to make them available in platforms to share, where others can actually, read them, etc., etc., and the children can consume them. So that's the role technology can play. But the pull has to come from the community itself. And the pull will only come if the community sees that there is value, understands that there is value. And those are factors beyond technological control, I would say. Thanks.
Thank you, Kalika. I think you said really right. Like technology can only act as an aid. It's ultimately the community which play the role of sharing their knowledge. I now move to Tanveer. Tanveer, you basically have worked with technology and you understand the platform. What do you think, the role technology can play in preserving languages, and how basically a community plays a role in preserving their own language itself?
Thanks, Praveen. I think Kalika said everything that I wanted to say. It's but let's look at the problem statement again. The way that we understand preservation is very problematic. Like, what's the first image that you come of preservation? Like long cupboards, attic filled with books, keys forgotten. Nobody knows what is in. We don't have like good data. We don't even know what we are preserving. But that's not the preservation that a culture or a language demands. It's a very different way of engagement. Take, for example, anything that becomes into an agile engagement where you're working with that particular culture, and language is but one expression of that. So when you are in engagement with something, you would always be in a continuous relationship with. That's the way that we need to preserve. If you were to think of preservation only in the context of saving something, then you're already getting into a complex that you should not be in, whether be it technology or be it for some other reasons. I think that's like a very clear moral and ethical philosophy that we'll have to keep in mind. Also, when Suresh was explaining the breadth in which we are talking about endangered languages and the difficulty in which languages are, there is another very interesting thing that's happening around this, right? When you look at the history of the way that the languages grew, they grew because of 4 important reasons, or call it pointers. The first one was geography. We started exploring geography. We became geographically adventurous, and languages went with it. The other one was our interest, our varied interest, from philosophy to anatomy to astronomy to all kinds of sciences, physical, all of this, alchemy, everything. So we had an interest that we engaged with, and our expression was also language. The other one was our history. We engaged with language, with our culture, with history. And another important thing was also the way that we fantasized about something. So all the fiction that we talk about, all of the ways that we dreamt about. So the new challenges are very important to ensure that a language flourishes. The one reason why we see languages finding it difficult to pace this new order is because the new frontier is no longer just people or geography. The new frontier is technology, which is that you also need to find bridges to talk about technology in a language that's accessible. This does not mean that technology is the way to talk about it. It means that the language has to have the accessibility or the capability to talk about it. In very simple terms, the future of a language is no longer about the past or about in the modes of preservation. It's about the future. It's about how do we make sense of our collective future. That's the way that we need to think about language and working with the language, rather than thinking about preserving and making audio copies and shelving it and creating another data bank for us to forget the keys at some point. Hand it back to you, Praveen.
That has triggered an interesting discussion, preservation of culture and language. I now go to Dr. Swarnalata. What is your organization, or in your capacity, that you think is taking up or planning in either preservation of culture and language?
Yes, I come from the government domain, so maybe my inputs will be restricted to the official languages, but I will talk broadly about the need for preservation of languages. When India got created, we had linguistic state boundaries. So we have languages which run beyond linguistic state boundaries, and cultures which run beyond state boundaries. So they need to be recognized. Like all the Dravidian states, they may be speaking different languages, but they have common culture. So one of the speakers already mentioned about the coastal region. So a person who comes from the coastal region identifies more himself with the coastal language Tulu, rather than being an Andhraite or a Konkan. So all these challenges are there. In the northeastern region, the challenge is that we have 8 states, and most of the states have English as the official language. And the Arunachal example which Kalika gave, Arunachal, is very, very conversant with Hindi. You are very comfortable when you go there, because I had gone to Kuang. So everybody speaks Hindi. So the role of technology is that if we want to preserve the languages, the role of technology is very, very important because of the future scope of globalization and localization. So the diffusion between localization and globalization has to happen. So the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach have to merge to preserve languages in the wake of technology. So another thing is that, we have very important dialects in India, Avdi and Bhojpuri. They are in the Purvanchal region. They will go across UP, Eastern UP and Western Bihar. So we have no single yardstick, and we have language like Santali, which goes across 3 states. Wherever we had the state's mandate of the language being recognized by the state as the first language, the best part. If it's second and third language, it gets some priority. But wherever we didn't have this government mandate to promote a language, although a Department of Culture is there and some other departments are responsible for the endangered languages. One input I can give that Dr. Anvita Abbey did a lot of work on Andamanese work, so you can probably refer to it if you have not referred so far. So the idea is that the diffusion of globalization and localization has to happen for the culture and the language to be preserved. So now we have to adopt the bottom-up approach rather than top-down approach in the wake of in the technology paradigm. So the role of our ministry, and I personally had been representing in the Unicode. So with respect to the 22 languages which are, the part of the scheduled languages in the Constitution, we have done tremendous work to bring them into technology. We have got them represented into Unicode. The tools for inputting and office work have been made available in the open source. So all those things have helped us. So what we should look at is that this is an opportunity for us to export our culture with the help of languages being represented on the internet, in which Wikipedia is one of the great efforts in terms of the organized and curated information being made available. So we have to do universalization of our local beliefs and cultural values. So how do we make it happen? In US, there is a separate funded project in University of Berkeley, which looks after the representation of the endangered languages and archaeological languages into the Unicode. So as far as the Unicode 22 languages are concerned, we have ensured that they are into Unicode, but a lot more needs to be done because that is the beginning point for us to digitalize the languages and bring them in the wake of technology. So those efforts are one of the directions which we can take. Then, I will say in India, we have very optimistic, future in the sense, not from the community side, but from the technology side. The projects like NOFN, National Optical Fiber Network, has made the connectivity to the grassroots level. Our e-governance initiatives have reached the grassroots level. The citizen service centers have reached all over India, at least at the district level. And all these, needs to be leveraged upon. And the National Language Technology Mission is also another step in this direction. So all of us need to work together. But with regard to the community, I have a suggestion here that if we give more presence to the community in the bottom-up approach, as the groups which are present in reality and focused towards some goal. Suppose it's self-help women groups, they are present in the remote regions and they are trying to bring out through the Saras platform, the local things which are art, craft, embroidery. It's like a business. Self-help groups is a business entity. So such groups can create their type of content. So far, I think we have been tapping the student communities more than anybody else. So we need to go to the various sections. It could be various, cults, religious cults. But we have to make sure that we don't end up giving unreliable information. But I know that the Wikipedia has a lot of procedural maturity in terms of getting the curated content. So all these kind of social entities which are present today and are already motivated towards a certain cause. So in the bottom-up approach, if we can bring them into the garb of the participation in the initiative like Wikipedia, that will be a very great thing to do. And the technology part we are already addressing, and we do have the technology. But for the endangered languages, of course, we need to move extra mile. And the concerns are very valid because from 165 languages, we have come to 780 languages in the next census. And we have even stopped collating that kind of data in the next census. So that's a point of concern. And with that, I will end here. And I will say that within the mission, we will be very happy to work with Wikimedia and to make such efforts of enlarging the community participation from in the bottom-up approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Lata. It was really good to see, the various approach and the topics you have pointed, especially around moving to various sections of the society, allowing them to be part of the community, and looking forward to basically increase the sense of volunteerism so that they come and contribute more. I now move to Suresh Kolichala. Suresh, you have been a Wikimedian working on Dravidian languages. You worked on Unicode, historical linguists. So, what do you think? Like in your own capacity, you are taking up or planning and to preserve a language.
So, thanks, Praveen. I think nice roundup. I think I really liked Kalika's take on why. I think the technology can only help so far. Right? I think it's actually the technology is just a tool. It's the community. So a lot of these communities have this low self-respect and inferiority complex. Like I used to have a friend who was a classmate. I didn't even realize in the criminal district that his mother tongue was not Gondi. I think he used to speak fluent Telugu. And then he speaks Marathi with his Marathi friends. So we always assumed that he's a Telugu guy who is talking Marathi, but he actually, in fact, when later I realized after coming to this country that his mother tongue was Gondi, and he only speaks Gondi at home, but speaks Telugu with the Telugu friends, Marathi with the Marathi friends, and Hindi with the many others. And that means he never represented. He was kind of somewhat ashamed to represent and identify himself as a Gondi. So when this is a kind of situation, I think that's where requires. I think Swarnalata ji mentioned about the 2020 education policy. I think I really like that one. We need to emphasize teaching in mother tongue, and where we can import some confidence into these communities where their mother tongue is recognized. They can learn their education. Education is the key to the door to their world of opportunities. And if the education, at least the primary education, is given in their mother tongue, I think that would infuse the confidence. They can come out and they can speak confidently, identify themselves to be the speakers of those languages, and then they can also contribute confidently to any of these technological things, data resources of their stories, their past as well as future. As Tanvir mentioned, it's not just the past, it's future, but I think past is what gives the pride, and the future is where they want to find those opportunities. And so.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, it's a nation of multiple language where individuals at least speak 2 languages. I myself speak, 4, and I'm sure there are a few who speak 6, 7, 8 languages.
I think it is Emeno who said that an Indian who doesn't speak more than 2 languages is dysfunctional. So,
quite interesting. And I'll move to Kalika. Can you also take on this?
Actually, I would like to ask people who are involved in Wikipedia, who have been doing this work for a long time, that how do they view endangered language communities and their interaction with a platform like Wiki? not just Wikipedia, Wikimedia, I would say, as a whole, because a lot of these communities, as Suresh just now said, are marginalized in many ways. A lot of these communities may not feel that they can take pride in their language, and their language is something worth preserving. And this is, this has to do with aspirations. When I was growing up in a city like Delhi, I know that a lot of parents and a lot of schools penalize children for speaking their own language, right? They would say, why are you speaking in your mother tongue? Speak in English, right? So that if all that is missing, and then on the other hand, you don't have, say, tools for entering the language, fonts for rendering those languages, or maybe those languages don't even have scripts or scripts that have been completely forgotten. So how in that situation, what kind of technological support would, or even evangelizing or community outreach would Wikipedia want and do, where maybe there is a role for technology beyond the most standard stuff that, more people should be putting in more documents of various kinds into Wikipedia in their own languages. Let's expand this. Let's make the community, when there is no community, like a Wikipedia community around a language. And that's where the language is in a serious danger of being lost. Then what's Wikipedia's view on it? Because that's where then the technologists can probably look for opportunities to help.
Absolutely. Tanveer, what's your take on this?
It's a difficult question which has both an easy answer and a difficult answer. I'll give you the easy answer first, which is the platforms are very democratic, which means that whether you're coming from a major language, like a global language, which has, 1 million plus speakers, users, whatever, the platform is still going to be the same. It's the policies, it's the detail where the devil is. So how does a small community, a small linguistic community, try and shape their own Wikimedia project, a Wikipedia project, is the biggest challenge of all. Because the easy answer to the difficult question that you asked, Kalika, is let's fashion it out on a community that is already flourishing. Now, which would those communities be? Let's say English, or French, or German, or Portuguese, or Hindi. Now, the problem is these communities took a long while to become important and notable languages on the digital front. So they have had their turns, they have had their tribulations, they have had their own moments of both success and failure. When a small linguistic community tries to achieve that, they are not always free in framing those policies. There's a very interesting comment that Frederick Noronha, who's a very active Wikimedian, Konkani Wikimedian, makes in the chat, which is pointing exactly to this, that the larger communities, whether they realize it or not, have such stringent principles and policies that smaller communities often find it difficult to express themselves, even at the level of the expression, let alone at the level of manifesting into a project. So what does technology do here? So technology at this point carries a dual responsibility of shaping the project or shaping the platform and also advising the policy. Now, this is where the community will have to come in more strongly. Because let's assume that the same project or the same platform is available for all of the languages. Why does, say, language A bear the struggle, bear the tribulation and still have an active community and an active presence, whereas community B has not been able to do it? I think that's a very important question in talking about what is the future of language and what is the role of technology there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanveer. Hope, Kalika, do you want to pitch in?
Yeah, no, I know it's a difficult question. And I was just thinking, there's a whole range of technological interventions and support here. So, starting from just basic tools required to a much more deeper technological intervention of the kind that Tanveen was suggesting.
I mean, sorry, Kalika, didn't mean to speak in between. Just
Sure.
to give you an example, there is investment that the Wikimedia Foundation is doing both in terms of resources and also in terms of, I think Danny is going to be speaking, Sandeep is speaking, and then Danny is going to be speaking about abstract Wikipedia, which tries to answer this question of a knowledge source without being bound to languages. So that's one of the ways to talk about it. Or take, for example, Konkani again. So the problem with Konkani was that it was a language that was written in so many scripts. And if you would only confine it to one script, then you are obviously marking the community and you are hindering the growth of the community. So one of the ways was that the interface was made in such a way that multiple input options were given. So that's a technological intervention that the community would step in and make use of. So you would still be contributing to the Konkani Wikipedia, but you would want to use the Romi script, or you would want to use the Devanagari script, or you would want to use the Kannada script. All of this was made a possibility. So there are these technological interventions. But again, I want to go back to say that unless and until the community finds a way of articulating those needs, technology itself cannot just say, it's wrong to assume technology to be the genie, right? To say, here is a wish and then your wish will be my command, kind of a thing. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, Tanvir, that's an interesting aspect about Konkani that you mentioned. Praveen, can I just make a quick comment? Yeah. Now, so does Wikimedia right now allow a single Wikimedia or Wikipedia site to be viewed in different scripts? Because that is one of my dream projects, is that because many of the Indian languages, like say Sanskrit, I can read many of the South Indian scripts fluently, but Devanagari scripts not much, but I would love to read the Sanskrit Wikipedia in my own native script. But okay. Well, we have plugins. Like I think I wrote one of the early conversions because Unicode, the way I was being the core committee member of the Unicode, I know how the Unicode has been placed, right? It is very easy mapping for most of the Indian scripts that we, I think then Aksharamukha, my good friend Vinod Rajan has written a great tools that will convert from any of the Indian scripts to any other scripts, and you can have browser things. But I think these are the technological innovations that need to be supported and popularized by the Indian community.
Absolutely. I think Danny mentioned like there are some languages that allows like Chinese, Siberian, but it needs to be set up, and there is some technicality in that. Great. Moving ahead. There is a need and there is a challenges too. So this question is to Vijay. What do you anticipate to be a major challenges in next 5 years? From your organization perspective, like is it infra awareness, ethical concerns, etc.?
So basically, you are aware that we are doing this National Language Translation Mission project, under which we have got very ambitious targets for the data sets building for different Indian languages. Although initially we will be focusing on 22 Indian languages only, but we will not be stopping over there. So second you said is the awareness. So awareness will increase the community participation. So once the communities are built for creating the Wikipedias, then naturally content will increase. And once presence is there, it will lead to preservation. It's very natural to it. And in the NLTM, we have set our own targets for ourselves. That is 20 times we want to make the ending content on the internet. So whatever content is there today, we will make it 20 times in 3 years' times. So Wikipedia is naturally part of the internet. So we will be taking content from the Wikipedia also. And for corpus building also, we will take Wikipedia content as a source material. So it will be part of our data sets. So we will be building speech technologies also that will assist Wikipedia. And we will also be doing state language missions where we will be involving the states and state organizations to increase the content and also to deploy the technologies that we built.
Okay, thank you. fact,
can I add something to it?
Yes, Rana, please go ahead.
You just heard Dr. Vasudev Verma. We have done a pilot project where we are trying to do human-bot collaboration to develop this content faster. So we will try to replicate this in the main mission as well. And let me relate one experience of, when we had to encode Bodo into the Unicode. So it is not owned by any particular state. So we approached Bodo Sahitya Sabha, and a representative from three representatives from there engaged with us. And they were very happy that somebody approached them to do this work of getting their language into the technology guard. So if these Sahitya academies and Sahitya Sabhas and literary organizations can be pulled into, it may not result into the Wikipedia kind of material article, but it can result into, some kind of books if people want to propagate through this channel that can enhance the content. So we will have to increase our scope and the way we are representing content today in the Wikipedia. We need to localize the requirements gathering in terms of the content. Second thing is that, we need to sort of get more and more different kinds of content and communities. That's the challenge. And another good news is that AICTE under the new education policy, since it has been mandated that they should impart education, even the higher education, through the local languages. So we have done a technology pipeline, speech-to-speech material conversion of educational videos. So those things will become a reality in coming years. And AICTE books will become multilingual content available. So the multilingual content availability across at least 12 languages will flourish like anything in the next 2 years. And we need to do our, pull our socks for the rest 10 or 12 low-resource languages, which we will try to do under the mission. So we have a lot of hope in terms of progressing well on these aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Swanlata. Talking about preservation through books, I think Sandeep's session on Wikisource would be super interesting. Moving ahead, so I'll just go to Tanveer. Tanveer, what do you anticipate to be the major challenges in next 5 years in terms of, infra awareness, ethical concerns, and so on? What's your take on that?
I think there are two levels of challenges in front of us. The first is a very physical challenge. This is access, hardware, platform, all of that. But there is also a slightly more grave concern that we don't talk about much. Take, for example, technology or platforms, Wikipedia, for example. Now, that's a platform that allows for curated knowledge, sanitized knowledge. We must understand that that's not the all of language. Language is much more than that. One part of knowledge or one part of language translates into knowledge. And now we are talking about, and our interest, our intention, our motivation is towards working and ensuring that knowledge part of language is, safe, is preserved. I'm not very comfortable using the word preserve, because usually the word preserve gives you very bad heebie-jeebies. So let's call it engagement. So we are in engagement with that. But what happens to the larger context of the language, which is a very colloquial expression, which is a very, very real expression of your history, of your past? So if you are talking about knowledge, we are usually talking about an academic mainstream knowledge that has a very, very direct connection to utility quotient. I think overcoming that challenge or overcoming that problem is going to be the biggest challenge. If you take a look at how organizations will invest their money, whether these are government organizations or not-for-profit or private organizations, they are going to be investing resources. They are going to be conducting skill building and capacity to work with this curated forms of knowledge. What happens to the larger corpus of language? And I think that question is something that is very urgent for us to talk about, because that is going to give us the broader overview about how to understand language. I acknowledge that Suresh has his hand up, but before I hand it over to him, we were talking about, we started this conversation with a slightly morbid tone of languages dying and people dying. But there is more to it, right? That languages die two deaths. One is a visible death, where you have the last of the descendants who pass away, where you have people who speak that language are no longer with us, or when the demography completely disappears, or the expressions disappear. But there is also a non-visible but very real death. That happens when a language does not translate into everyday actions. Language does not become the reflector of your popular culture, of your debate, of your dissent, of your discussions. And if we don't understand and if we don't talk about that, that is going to be the biggest challenge. Despite our best efforts, despite our best intentions, despite the best of the resources, I don't think we would ever be able to bridge that gap if we don't acknowledge it. Thank you.
Suresh, you seem to have a question there.
No, I think great points, Tanveen. I think as earlier, Swarnalata ji was mentioning about UC Berkeley having a project. I think this is where I see that in addition to the policy by the governments, I think the universities need to have a bigger role that they can play. They have the funds, they have the research students, they have the interest where they can go to the communities, create these resources, as well as I think even the teaching material that Swarnalata ji is talking about, that some of the low resources don't have the material. I think these materials could be created and contributed both by the research students and the universities, as well as the community, right? So that's where I thought the universities have a greater role.
Okay. In the interest of time, I think let's take any questions from anyone else. I don't see any questions here. Probably I'll just give a pause of 30 seconds to see if anything comes up on chat. In the meanwhile, I think it we just triggered an interesting discussion. Still, it's going more interesting, but somehow it's already going to be 1 hour mark, so we will try to wrap it up soon. But it was a quite interesting conversation where we pointed out on different things. Technology can just be an aid, but we need to encourage the communities to be part of it. We have to imbibe the sense of volunteerism in general, and how that can be inculcated. That is something probably policymakers, other individuals, evangelists, institutions, industries need to work together on this. I don't see any questions here. So moving ahead to the closure remarks. But also, government keep doing a lot of effort in terms of creating content. I see a question. I'm sorry. In terms of creating more content and repositories, I think it will be good for the institutions also to come together and understand, and try to adapt the Creative Commons license, which will make sharing information more openly. So there's a question like how to address digital literacy problem in the mining communities. So is this, I think the question, probably can be directed to Kalika or Tanvir.
Actually, people, we keep saying digital literacy problem, but provided the right kind of resources, people can become digitally literate in the most amazing way, not in the sense that we think that they should be first taught this and then taught this. So people kind of have these frog leaping experiences to become digital illiterate. So as long as we provide the resources and the infrastructure and the incentive, I mean, why would I go and check on something or the other, if I don't feel that there is a need for me to do that, right? So I think that's the thing. Sorry.
Our department, Ministry of Electronics and IT, has done a lot of work in this area. The basic digital literacy has been provided to people, how to operate a mobile, how to operate a computer. So I don't have the numbers how much has been covered countrywide, but a lot of efforts have gone into this direction by e-learning division of the department. But I won't be able to quote the figures.
Thank you. Tanvir, what do you think from the Wikipedia communities or in general Wikimedia communities perspective? What how digital access, how to address the digital literacy problem in general with the communities?
I think it's what Kalika mentioned. Unless and until you don't have an incentive that works for the individual without understanding the context, without understanding the necessity of it, I don't think a successful learning program. All said and done, digital literacy is still a learning program, which means that you need to have an objective, which means you need to have a plan. So if you have a good plan, if you have a good objective, and if you tailor it according to the context, I think it's going to be.
Thank you. Suresh, do you want to make any remark here? Okay. Moving ahead with that, the basic assumption is that in every language there are living values the speaker believe and maintain from time to time. However, I think time changes and the language changes too, to cope up with, among other things, newer values coming from outside and the need to be accepted in wider communities in general. In the process of exchanging linguistic and cultural phenomena, domination and submission take place as a consequence. Therefore, dominating languages would basically place a certain language as a receiver of the exchange, and this is where the state of being endangered begins. And preserving endangered languages can be the solution of putting to an end to the discrimination of indigenous people and strengthening the link between the culture, language, and identity. As a society, we need to make indigenous language a part of of our everyday lives and culture, and promote them on a larger scale. Like what Kalika said, in schools, sometimes it's it's promoted that you need to speak only in English. You cannot speak your mother tongue. That could be one of the things. But this is a call to action to Wikimedia foundations, passionate wiki communities, tech orgs, local universities, and the government to initiate plan to maintain the submitting language, from further unexpected situation. The big number of endangered local languages basically necessitates the attentions to make a national campaign for preserving indigenous languages through a more integrated national cultural strategy. With this, I would like to thank all the panelists who have come here and shared their bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll hand over to Professor Vasu.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This is a wonderful, wonderful panel discussion. Thank you for hosting it so well, Praveen. And then great contributions from Swarnalata ji, Vijay Kumar ji, Suresh, Tanvir, Kalika. This actually emphasizes on the importance of intelligent, rational conversations that has to happen time and again so that the call for actions can be derived from these conversations. So thank you so much for this panel discussion. So we'll move ahead with the next program. Unfortunately, Amir will not be able to join us today, but then we have two more very interesting talks. I request Sandeep Gill has been a very active Wikimedian, and he is passionate about this GLAM, and then he's been the knight of protecting the culture at the Wikimedia Foundation. So I request Sandeep to talk about wiki sources, something that we all wanted to embrace at the various levels, within this community that is interested in building technology for Indian languages. So Sandeep.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vasu. I'll just share my screen. someone confirm if?
Yes, we can see your
is-
screen. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. It was a really nice panel discussion that we just came out of, and yeah, I could relate with some of the questions around indigenous language documentation and engagement with the communities, with some of the minority communities, and in that regard, taking that conversation forward, I'm going to introduce a lesser known Wikimedia project, which is Wikisource. And I'm just going to share some stories, some success stories, and some of the, some of the new ideas that this community of Wikisource is experimenting. So, these are some of the logos of Wikimedia projects. One is Wiktionary, the first one, and then you obviously are familiar with Wikipedia. And the third one is Wikisource. So what do these logos and what do these projects represent? Wiktionary, as the name suggests, it's about dictionaries, and obviously you all know Wikipedia, which are encyclopedias. And Wikisource, the name is not that clear, but what it represents is, it's like a digital library, a free digital library of public domain texts. So you can read texts like, let's say, Shakespeare or Pushkin on Wikisource, but not Sidney Sheldon or J.K. Rowling for now, because copyrights exist and they make things difficult, but maybe it's easier for some people. But yeah, for the free knowledge movement, that's an obstacle that's keeping us from sharing those texts here. Obviously, Wikipedia is the most popular project, but Wikisource has been growing rapidly in the recent years, especially in some of the underrepresented parts of the Wikimedia movement. And why is it so? Because some of the major languages written in Latin or Cyrillic scripts, they do have a lot of access to a lot of other sources, and there are other platforms that exist where they have the texts. For instance, Project Gutenberg is a similar project to Wikisource, but it only exists in 16 languages. So for all those languages which are not being served by projects like Project Gutenberg, Wikisource is the place, and it adds more to those projects as well, and I'll talk more about those. But to put things in perspective, Wikisource exists in 70 plus languages compared to Project Gutenberg in only 16, and it becomes an essential infrastructure for these languages, because if access to source text to books is not available, then you can't really think about building a dictionary or a Wikipedia or Wikicourse. So it's like really important. It's really crucial to have that, to have this project. But even if it doesn't help a lot in building the other projects, as of itself, it's a really useful platform. It's the only place in the Wikimedia ecosystem where you can go and read a poem or read a short story or a novel. So that's a really important aspect of this project. So now I'll just share some of the languages that exist on Wikisource, and as you can see, English, French, Russian. So no surprises here. But what is new, what is more, is if you scroll down, then you see dozens of other languages which are growing at the multilingual Wikisource and are currently under incubation, you can see. Now I'll just give a brief intro to what Wikisource looks like with an example of English Wikisource. So this is the main page of English Wikisource. You can see there are some text. It gives some stats, and there is a featured text. and then you can click on a text, that you see, and then you can go to that text on Wikisource. So for instance, this is an example text by Virginia Woolf, and you can see a download button at the top right corner, and that allows you to download this in multiple formats, and you can see all the different formats available here. And if you are looking for another format that's not here, you can click on that option, and you'll see other options that are available as well. And this is not something, and adding the technology aspect, this is not something that's been here for a very long time. Like, this is a new technology, and this is a new feature that was developed by the community tech team, and now it's available across all the 70 wiki sources. And with these, just a fact, with this feature being standardized and implemented across wiki sources, the number of downloads from Wikisource projects has more than doubled in the last year. And if you scroll down a bit more on the main page of English Wikisource, you'll see, on the right-hand side, you'll see that there are some indexes. You can check out some authors or works by era, by genre, and you can also see some current collaborations that are going on. What are the texts that the community is working on, and now I'm going to tell you what is it that actually Wikisource does. So this is an example page of a book that's been uploaded to Wikisource as a scanned file, but is yet to be available as a readable text, as I showed you with Virginia Woolf example. And we call these pages the index pages, and it lists all the pages that are there. You see there are yellow colored pages or the green colored pages, and which this just means the level of proofreading that has been done. Yellow is that they've been proofread once, and the green means that they are validated and good to go. So with this, what Wikisource, although we call it a library, but I think it's more like a library or a bookstore with an adjacent workshop next to it, where new books or like old texts are being worked upon, are being prepared for the digital world by the community. And what I mean by preparing for the digital world is this example. Here you can see on the right hand side of the screen, there is a scanned file. And on the left hand side, the community uses OCR, optical character recognition, to get a version of the text, and then they verify it, they proofread it from the main source. And that's how they're actually turning scanned books into digital artifacts and making them searchable, and also adding interwiki links, connecting with Wiktionary at times when there are words that need more explanation, or other authors or other topics that people would like to research or read more about. So that's how it becomes a very rich digital document instead of just a file that you need to go through and watch and not being able to search through it. So this is a really brief introduction to what Wikisource is. And now I'll just share some of the stories of what makes it really amazing as well, I think. So Wikisource has the power to become a really good onboarding platform for the Wikimedia movement at large. And we have some examples of people doing it already, the Punjabi community or the Armenian community. So why it becomes an onboarding platform for, at least for, non-Latin languages, is because when newbies are coming on Wikimedia projects, for let's say Punjabi, the first thing that they have to learn is how to type in Punjabi on the internet. That's what I've been doing in the last 10 years of my wiki life. I've been teaching a lot of people to join and contribute to Wikimedia projects, and So that's the first thing they have to learn. But if you also add Wikipedia info boxes and translation and references, all that into that mix, it becomes really overwhelming for newbies to follow all that in one workshop or a couple of workshops even. So that's where, you know, and then there is, I've not even talked about the discussions on Wikipedia, you know, where it can be, and the articles getting deleted. So all that I've not even touched upon that. So there is like a, you know, a learning curve to Wikipedia, while for Wikisource, you know, it's a really, there are hardly any arguments, and, you know, all you have to do is read a text and transcribe it, and you're good to go. And that becomes sort of a, you know, first step into the movement. But yeah, why is it not an onboarding platform at large? Why it's not advocated more about? It's because that we need to improve the platform to be able to do this better, and we can discuss about what those improvements can be later. So just wanted to point this out. And next up, I'll talk about, you know, how Wikisource is helping with institutions holding collections to collaborate with communities of origin. So here is an example of British Library opening up access to a rare collection of Bengali texts as part of 2 Centuries of Indian Print project that they're doing. And then they are collaborating with Bengali Wikisource community, organizing multiple proofreading contests. And these works are now, you know, freely available, and they're being proofread by the community, and you can check them out on Bengali Wikisource. So I believe that's a really, you know, that's something that more and more institutions should be doing who are holding collections, and this also helps the communities, because it also helps the institutions, because once the communities proofread these texts, they can then take them back to their institutions, and, you know, not just the OCR that they currently have.